So we're just going to think about some self-awareness and sensitivity issues around kind of our own cultures and backgrounds, and then again, how that kind of informs some of our interactions with others. This will just kind of be introductory stuff today. So that definitely is a interaction between culture and providing healthcare to others, because it really influences both our own sense, whoa, it's jumping on its own, our own sense of how we were raised to think about health and wellness, but then how that maybe differs with people that we're taking care of and their own beliefs. Culture definitely influences your own sense of what it means to be ill, what it means to be well, how and when you access healthcare, and it really impacts how we communicate with other people about this. By understanding both a little bit better about ourselves, but then also how we can interact with others on learning what it means to them in their own culture and background, we can definitely improve their satisfaction with their visits, and we can help create treatment plans that are a joint plan between the patient and ourselves. But again, in order to really do this well, we kind of have to be aware of our own assumptions, our own values, our own biases. Keeps jumping. Okay. So if you have a way, I would like you to respond to when you hear the word culture, like, what does that mean to you? What does it make you think of when you just hear the word culture? So we're going to make a word cloud of what that means to us. Didn't know it was going to keep jumping around positions like that. Okay. So you can see here what some of us think of, what brings to mind when we think about the word culture. So this is just, you can define culture many ways. One example would be a dynamic set of shared values, beliefs, customs, communication styles, and behaviors that then is kind of seen through the lens of your education, your gender, your age, your socioeconomic status. There's lots of things that influence your culture. And just because someone is considered or considers themselves part of a particular culture doesn't mean that they fully adapt all of the things that are considered norms in that culture. So to help us think about what culture means to each of us as individuals, there's some self-reflection questions here. What does it mean to you? What do you think of when you think about your own culture? What's distinctive or special in your own culture? How has that shaped you? Where do you find your cultural identity now? Definitely, for some individuals, their cultural identity shifts at different stages in their life. Okay. So one exercise that kind of helps us reflect on how our cultures have influenced each of us and how we each have different cultural backgrounds. This is called Crossing the Line. Now, we have done this in the past, when we were live face to face, we would line up in the front of the classroom and literally make a line. We obviously can't do that in Zoom. So I had to really try to think hard about how to adapt this exercise to a Zoom format. So the way I came up with is to, what we're going to do is I'm going to read a series of statements. And if you feel that statement describes you, then what we did in the classroom is you would literally walk across that line and turn and face the rest of the class so that we could see who that applied to. Everyone should know that that is entirely up to you, that if at any point you don't want to cross the line, you don't want to reveal that about yourself, that's totally fine. We would read a statement that, like, you can always just stay on the other side of the line and just feel whatever feelings come up for you in that moment. But instead of crossing the line, I think what we'll do is we'll have everyone turn their cameras off. And if that statement applies to you, then you'll just briefly turn your camera on. And that'll be our way of crossing the line. So everyone can turn their cameras off.
For this, could you stop screen sharing so we can see the grid view of people?
Yes, I can do that. That's a helpful thing. Is that better? Okay. And I'll turn my camera off too. Okay. So I'm going to read the directions. I'm going to read them as I would read them when we were actually crossing the line, but we're going to have to do this a little bit differently. So we're going to read a series of statements. If you feel like that describes you, applies to you, you've had that experience, then you would cross the line or turn your camera on briefly. If you don't feel comfortable crossing the line, even though you are part of that group, that's okay. You can stay where you are, leave your camera off, and just notice any feelings that you have. And then we're going to do a debrief at the end. So there's about 25 statements that I will read. And again, if you feel comfortable and you feel that applies to you, then just turn your camera on briefly to cross the line. Okay. So the first statement, I played sports in high school. can turn your cameras off. I have traveled to a country that speaks a language other than English. Okay, turn your cameras off. At some point, I was picked on or bullied in school. Okay. I am the first in my family to go to college. Okay. I have grandparents that were born outside of the United States. Okay. I have caught myself judging someone before I ever met them. Okay. I have at some point raised, grown, or hunted for food for my own consumption. Okay. At some point, I have felt discriminated against for my race, my gender, or my personal beliefs. Okay. At some point, I have felt like I have been favored or privileged for my race, my gender, or my personal beliefs. Okay. I have concerns in the future about balancing my career and my personal and family life. Okay. Growing up, I had a parent who read children's books to me. Okay. At some point, I have had someone in my life affected by alcohol or drugs. Okay. At some point in my life, I've had someone close to me die. Okay. At some point in my life, I have waited to the last minute and crammed for an exam. Okay. I speak more than one language. Okay. At some point, I have lived in a rural or country area. Okay. At some point, I have lived in a city or suburb area. Okay. I am either an only child or one of 4 or more children in my family. Okay. At some point, this exercise has made me uncomfortable. Okay. I feel like I am culturally aware or competent. Okay. At some point in this exercise, I probably should have crossed the line and I chose not to. Okay. You can all turn your cameras on. So let me move to. Okay. So anyone who wants to share, what do you think is the purpose of this exercise?
I noticed for a majority of the questions, we've all experienced that. A lot of people experience.
So we have some shared experiences as a group. Yeah. How did it feel when you crossed the line? Oh, I didn't turn my camera back on. I'm sorry. How did it feel when you crossed the line and you were part of a large group that crossed the line?
Maybe like more supported, especially in some of the like harder things to cross the line for.
Mm-hmm. How did it feel when you didn't cross the line, either because something didn't apply to you or things were uncomfortable?
Maybe a little bit voyeuristic, like that, you know, if I didn't need to cross the line, but other people had to share, or didn't have to, but were willing to identify with that, but then they were being vulnerable with that part of their identity.
Yeah. So think about every time we interview a patient, we're asking them to share potentially something that might be uncomfortable, that might make them feel vulnerable. And we're asking that hopefully to gain a better understanding of the person that they are and what they value so that we can provide care that fits within their own cultural context. But that doesn't necessarily make it feel any less vulnerable to the person that you're asking the question to. So part of the point of this exercise is to kind of remind us how in our daily interactions with people, we ask those questions 100 times or at least 20 or 30 times every day. And so to some extent, they become very routine to us as providers. I notice in OSCEs right now, there are certain questions that make us feel uncomfortable to ask. And you tend to preference those with, I ask this of everybody that I'm going to say, and kind of introduce it as an uncomfortable question. But over time, when you've asked that same kind of question, and especially as you work in a practice, there are going to be certain subsets of questions that you tend to ask very routinely. That may look very different for different specialties. So working in dermatology, you're going to be asking people questions about their skin and their rashes and symptoms related to that. That might look very different from someone who's working in urology, who's asking about urological symptoms, or someone in OBGYN. But you get used to kind of your own subset of symptoms. But that for that patient, that might be the first time someone's asked them that particular question. And so trying to maintain a recollection of even something that we think is a routine question might be uncomfortable for that particular person to answer. So again, this intersection of providing healthcare, but how it's colored by our own personal beliefs, our own background, our own upbringing, our own understanding. Being really sensitive to that can make us better providers. So we need to be aware that we all have differences in cultures. Other than maybe some of the questions about, like, I think almost everyone said that they had at some point lived in a rural area or an urban area. I mean, there were a few things that were more general, but there were very few things that we said in those statements that applied to everyone. We all have differences. We all have our own personal way of behaving, interpreting, communicating, and that can be very different in different cultures. And that really, like I said, impacts how they think about healthcare, how they seek out healthcare professionals, how they think about medications or lifestyle changes, and can really affect the way they want to interact with getting healthcare. So some terminology that we may all think is uniform really may not be uniform. So for the purposes of thinking about it in this context, if you think of disease as being the biological condition, so influenza or coronary artery disease, illness, if we think about it as being just unwell, not necessarily a particular disease. Sickness is a condition that isn't wanted. And this, again, is just one context of thinking about it, just for common terminology. And then health is not being sick. But even that in different cultures can mean different things. So in some cultures, if you're not having any symptoms, then you're not sick. In other cultures, if you have something capable of causing disease, so I think right now COVID is probably a good analogy for this. So if you have testable, findable COVID virus, but you feel fine, are you sick? In some cultures, no, you're not sick. You don't have any symptoms. No one would have known it was there if you hadn't been tested for it. You're symptom free. But in other cultures, just having the virus means that you're sick because you could transmit it to someone else, which is, I think, the way most of us in healthcare look at it when we worry about transmission of disease. We need to know if someone has that ability to transmit COVID. Different cultures have different beliefs about their own perception of their own body. That can be filtered through the lens of their own individual experience, their own personalities. What makes a body strong? What makes it frail? What makes it susceptible to illness? Different ideas about how your body can change and how it can be healed or repaired or fixed. Some examples of this, of how other cultures may think about it, is can your body be susceptible to spirits that can affect how your body is susceptible to illness or frailty? Toxins or evil humors. So these are cultural or personal beliefs that you may come across that inform someone else's opinion about how they need to be addressed or treated. That may be something that is different from your own current experience and something that we need to be aware of. Perception of pain. This can be cultural. It can also be extremely personal. There can be very different experiences in thinking about pain between Western medicine, biomedicine. It can also be very, very individual. So for example, you have two kids playing on the playground. They both fall off the monkey bars. Mother of kid one runs over, picks the kid up, cuddles them, tells them how worried they are. Are you okay? Mother of kid two tells the kid to brush themselves off and stand up and, okay, you look fine, get right back at it. Those kids may develop very different experiences of what it means to be injured or to have pain, just based on their own interactions as kids. Causes of sickness. So in Western medicine, we tend to have a biomedical or mechanical view. Just a comparison of another view. So in some chiropractic practices, illness comes from the interaction of the musculoskeletal system and the neurological system. And so therefore fixing things comes from repairing that relationship between the musculoskeletal system and the neurologic system. And that's just one example. You may have some beliefs, I don't know, we used to refer to them as old wives' tales, like what causes a cold? Going outside with your hair wet in the winter. How about the belief that eating chicken soup is going to help fix a cold? Where did that come from? Was that a cultural construct at some point? There can be different beliefs about, another example would be paralysis, that paralysis is caused by a neurological dysfunction. Paralysis is caused by a hex. Paralysis is caused by a charm. Different cultures may not only have different definitions of sickness, but how that is displayed or presented. Some cultures really value stoicism, and that's expected. Some really value expressing pain. For some cultures, pain is just kind of part of your existence and it's an expected part of life. Some cultures, it's an opportunity to atone for something in your past. Cancer is another area where there can be cultural beliefs about what caused cancer, how you react to having cancer. So really exploring with patients and having a model to remind us to explore that can be important. Culture really can influence how we think about different aspects of our own health. for example, diet. A lot of us, our favorite foods are really influenced by some aspect of how we grew up or where we lived. Affects what types of food we eat. What we think about eating foods at different times in our lives, how we balance foods, what foods should be avoided. I tease my husband that growing up Midwestern, he thought ketchup was like a really spicy condiment. And I shared that until I lived in Houston, going to PA school for 2 years, and opened my eyes to a whole new palette of things. So which of these foods do you think are edible?
Not the dog for me.
And it's the for me part that's the key part here. All of these foods are eaten somewhere in the world. I came across this example. There are certainly things on this list that I would never think of eating, or I suppose I would have to be in some kind of survivor situation. But some of these foods are considered normal diet in other areas of the world or in other cultures. Hygiene. Culture can influence how someone bathes or what they consider the purpose of bathing. What kinds of clothing is needed and what type and weight. How they care for specific body parts or even body waste. Several cultures share this idea of hot and cold conditions. And so I found some examples here of what kinds of conditions, medications, and foods are considered hot versus considered cold. And that their culture may mean that they need to balance these things, or that certain hot things are necessary for certain conditions. Your culture may inform your beliefs about where you should even access care. Is that something that should happen primarily at home? Is that something that should happen primarily in a hospital environment? And who is considered the expert in that care? I'm going to be posting all of these slides, so you guys, I should have said that much earlier. I hope you guys aren't trying to frantically take notes or anything. So you'll have access to some of these resources that I collected. Thinking about different cultures and how they think about health and medicine and healthcare. There's lots of, these are some more general resources. All right. I don't know if you've already covered this in H&P a little bit, I think, and you'll come back to it again, but there's a couple different models that can really help us have these conversations with patients and remind us how to talk to patients about their culture, their beliefs, what's important to them, and how that is affecting how they want to access healthcare. So the LEARN model is one model that can be effective in reminding us how to do this. So the L stands for listen. When we greet the patient and whoever's with them, if English is not their primary language, we should always be asking them if they wanted an interpreter present. Hopefully that's been arranged ahead of time. And then we just want to start with some really open-ended questions. Why are you here today? How can I help you today? The E stands for elicit, which is to learn more about their own health beliefs. What is concerning you? Why do you think you have this problem? What started it? What kind of treatments or advice have you already gotten? How can I be the most help to you? The A is for assess. So assessing kind of what their current understanding is, what's affecting them, who's important to them in making their medical decisions. The R is for recommend. So when it comes to talking about a plan of action, have them kind of talk back what their understanding is of what you've just told them. And then the N is for negotiate. So now that I understand more about you, you understand more about my explanation of what I think is going on and what I'm recommending. Let's talk about a plan that can work for you. What should be the next steps? Another model that can help us address these issues with patients, doing a cultural status exam. There's a lot of overlap here. So asking to start with, how would you describe the problem that is bringing you in? And asking if there's someone else that you should be talking to, whether that's someone that they brought with them or someone that they would like included in their care. How long have you had it? Talk to them about, asking them about, is this a problem you're familiar with? How is it presented in others that you know about? What do you think is causing this problem? What's wrong? What's out of balance? Why do you think this is happening to you and why now? What do you think might help clear up this problem? And apart from me, what else or who else do you think might help you get better? So asking questions in this way hopefully is giving permission to them to talk about their own culture, their own beliefs, their own backgrounds, and give you a chance to partner with the patient to find something that is going to work. Any questions or comments about the LEARN model, the cultural status? Has anybody had a chance to use something like that in one of your healthcare roles in the past? So maybe this is something somewhat new to many of us. talking, thinking specifically about religious and spiritual issues as part of how someone thinks about healthcare. So this is really common. Surveys have shown, they did some surveys of hospitalized patients, and they showed up to 90% of the patients had considered themselves had to have some strong religious or spiritual belief. And they definitely can have an impact on how someone makes decisions about their own health care. They influence how they live their daily lives. And it actually is a recognized JCAHO standard of care. JCAHO requires that there is access to pastoral care or some kind of chaplaincy in all of the hospitals that they accredit. So this could be another area where, in order to provide better care to our patients, to be aware of whatever common religious practices are in our area, wherever we end up. And that can be part of what we incorporate into those lean-in cultural interviewing models. Do you have specific religious beliefs or spiritual beliefs that are going to impact how we provide your care or impact your treatment? Is there anything that we're talking about in your plan that creates a conflict for you? And how can we think about that? Because in JCAHO accredited hospitals, they do have that requirement for chaplaincy or pastoral care. That also means that you have those people as resources to you to help think through issues with patients. All right, that's the end of my slides. Any questions or comments? Since you guys have been quiet, I may put you through a lot at the beginning of class. All right, well, I will post those slides and those references. Hopefully we'll have some activities later this semester. We'll have some time to practice role-playing some of those models, because if that's something that you've never had experience using, it tends to feel foreign or different, just like if asking all the other questions that we ask in OSCE, if you hadn't practiced them, you're not going to think of them or have experience using them. So I think it's good to have some chance to kind of role play using some of those models of interviewing. All right, well, that is our first part for today. We'll pick this up again next week. I'll stick around if anybody has any questions or comments after class. Otherwise, have a good rest of your day and stay warm.
Professor Garvey.
Yeah.
Just to clarify yesterday about that Brightspace stuff.
Uh-huh.
So I went into my settings where Elena was talking about being able to click all that stuff. All it does is it then just sends you a ton of notifications to your email.
Okay.
So like today I had like 25 new emails of Brightspace notifications, and they all look exactly alike. So it's hard to, it'll just say like content stuff or this. So I'm going to actually delete all those and just stick with my regular Brightspace notifications, but I nowhere see any way to get feedback or anything. So.
Okay. Well, I emailed the Center for Teacher and Learning, so we'll see if they come up with any other suggestions. Otherwise, I think I'll just plan on, if I've given feedback in addition to the grade, that I'll make sure I post that as a notice or something in the course.
Okay. Yeah. That's a good way to do it, or an email or something to everybody. Something like that.
Okay.
But if you have if you're sending feedback like you did to me, just for a comment or something, probably it's better in an email or something.
Yeah, and I think there might be a way to do that from within the course too. So hopefully, I'm hoping that's what Center for Teaching and Learning can show me, a streamlined way to do that.
Okay. Thanks.
Mhm.